Welcome to today's webinar. My name is David Fox and I'm joined by my colleague today, Lewis Jones, and we are from Snow Software. Today we're going to be talking you through the different cost savings that you can have when you implement a successful software asset management function within your organization. So first of all, let's talk about Snow Software. We are the world's leading SAM solution provider with over 6,000 customers in which inventory over 11 million devices. We have 7 regional support centers across the world. We are a global organization and we have 500 plus employees, and at the moment we are growing at a huge rate, and if you're new in the morning, I can guarantee you won't be the new person come the afternoon. So at Snow Software, one of our primary missions is to stop organizations from paying too much for the software they consume. Now, what we mean by that is we encourage you to optimize your existing investment in software rather than being reactive and going out and purchasing new licenses and overspending and over-licensing your environment. $326 billion will be spent on software this year, which is a huge amount of money. And when you think about it, software constitutes one of the top 5 spends for an organization. So a lot of money goes into software. You need to make sure that investment is optimized and it actually goes to good use. And that's where our mission statement comes in. We want to help you optimize and utilize that key investment you've made in software. So today we're going to be talking about a number of ways in which you can cut costs with software asset management. So the first thing, we're going to talk about the people, processes, and technology. Now, each 3 of them are really important in helping you save money through software asset management, and they play a pivotal role in the whole software asset management function within your business. We're going to be talking about the education and communication piece, and we'll discuss this later on, but education and communication within organizations about SAM, about license compliancy, about license types is something that is often overlooked, but an integral way that you can actually save money on software assets. We're going to talk about transparency. So transparency of your entitlement data, transparency of your installation data, matching those up and making sure you've got an effective license position you can manage and proactively address any risks. As we mentioned previously, our mission statement is about optimizing existing assets, and we're going to tell you how you can do that and why that will save you money. And finally, software asset management has come an awful long way in the last few years. And at Snow Software, we've generated a concept called 4th generation SAM. Now, this means that it's no longer the responsibility of a single person, but actually everyone within your organization. So first of all, myself and Lewis are going to talk about the people, process, and technology element. So first of all, people. Okay, that people are a vital part of any business. Without people, there wouldn't be a business. You need to make sure that your software asset management team or your license management team has the right levels of licensing knowledge for your key vendors. They need to be able to analyze the software asset management data within your technology. So Snow License Manager makes data easy and easy to read, but you still need to be able to interpret that data and actually understand what the compliance position is, where you can make savings or where you've got your biggest risks. The people part of it also implement and communicate those key SAM processes. And again, this is something that we don't really see very often happening. It's a byproduct. The people just expect end users to understand what the SAM processes are, but you need to actively and proactively communicate that. And finally, the people actually embed SAM within the business. I'm a firm believer that software asset management will be at the heart of the business in the future because it can provide so much data to all of these other key stakeholders. So my colleague Lewis is actually someone that proactively and is constantly talking to our customers. And Lewis, how are we finding people getting the people element involved when implementing software asset management?
I think the initial worry with customers is that they're not going to have enough resource for software asset management. But the key point with SAM is that it has to be a part of a business. If you ignore it, the problems only increase. If you're going to be audited, let's say, from a big vendor like Microsoft or Adobe, they have no concern whatsoever for your resource. So once you've understood the basics of SAM and in fact implemented a process, that makes things a lot easier moving forward.
Excellent. You mentioned about a process there, Lewis, and we firmly believe that processes are the cornerstone of a successful software asset management function, and it can also help users, again, kind of subconsciously and automatically almost save a lot of money on their software assets. Are we seeing end users focusing on the process side of things when talking about cost savings in technology, or is a SAM process or policy still kind of like a mystical myth that people know about but don't really see very often?
A SAM process really is one of those things that once you implement, you never go back from. But the initial daunting factor, again, is how are we going to put this process together? And that's something that we can help you do. It's a fairly straightforward thing to put into place, but it's understanding, which piece of the puzzle goes in which order, and that's the biggest thing with SAM.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And then talking about the final element of the three stages, if you like, and that is the technology. And in our case, that's things like Snow License Manager. Now, the technology, there's a misconception that if you install a SAM technology, it will do absolutely everything that you need it to do. It will make you compliant and it will make your coffee while it's doing it. That is simply not the case. There is no such thing as a silver bullet solution. You need the right blend of the people, the processes, and the technology in place to optimize and really implement a best practice software asset management function. So within Snow, for example, you have that transparency on all of the applications that's installed throughout your estate, from the desktop, but also the data center and the virtualized environment. We can easily and quickly generate an effective license position, which, Lewis, is something people can do pretty much straight out of the box once they add all of their entitlement data. It's also about looking at the usage side of things. So if you've got a project installed, for example, are your users actually using the software, or has it been inactive for 30 days or more? If it has been inactive, it is up to the SAM team to reclaim that license, either put it into a licensing pool or reharvest it to another user that has a business justification for needing that piece of software. It's all about managing your assets centrally as well. I mean, Lewis, I'm sure you'll agree, but when you talk to customers, you hear horror stories about how someone's left the organization and not stored all of their licenses and contract information in Snow or a central repository, and then there's been no visibility on previous entitlement and previous transaction data.
It's exactly true. And if you can't prove that you've purchased an application, it's as good as not having one from an auditor's perspective.
Absolutely. You need that full history of all of your entitlement data, including the upgrade and downgrade and base licenses, to make sure, as Lewis said, in an audit situation you are fully prepared and you have all of the information you need. But Snow can also provide you with business intelligent data. Now, what I mean by that is software asset management sits on such key pieces of information that can actually branch out to stakeholders outside of IT. So the likes of finance with financial management information, how much money we're spending on software each year, how much our contracts are worth. You've also got HR for user information. I know a number of our customers that actually use the user information within Snow to help cross-check their Active Directory systems. You've also got legal in terms of compliance. And then you've obviously got the key stakeholders within IT as well, like IT security, the service desk and DevOps. There really is no limit to the data that the software asset management sits on. So let's move on to the education and communication piece. Now, Lewis, I think, again, you'll agree, people don't really focus on educating their end users about SAM processes or SAM technologies, do they? I mean, but why should they focus on it?
Well, with SAM, it can cause a big risk to the business. If your staff don't understand the value of installing software, for example, if you can install software willy-nilly, if you have file sharing documents installed, such as BitTorrent or anything like that, there is a risk to the business. And it always comes from management that you shouldn't be sharing public documents, you shouldn't be spending money, but often that message isn't communicated, and that's where the education piece comes in.
Absolutely, I think you hit on a key point there about sharing documents and stuff like that. So with the introduction of cloud technologies like Azure and AWS and Office 365 and the collaboration that goes on in there and the amount of financial risk in there, you'd say that education and communication is even more important now than it ever has been.
I would say so.
So, but why should you educate? So first of all, you need to talk to them about why you're doing software asset management. It sounds really simple and easy, but it's a vital part of making sure that you do avoid overspending on software and you remain compliant. So introduce the basic concepts within software asset management, how it will impact each user personally, make it personable, how will it improve their lives. It's also important to talk about basic licensing metrics. I know a number of end users have intranet sites with all the basic, this is what a user license means, this is what a device license means, this is what a processor license means, etc. It really works, and if you're proactive in educating people, instead of questioning the software asset management team's decisions all the time, you'll actually find that they'll be proactive in coming to you saying, what license type would fit me best for this application? Or do I actually need to buy a license for this? Do we have any spares? It's also really important to tell them about the processes and policies. So if you picture a path, you've got a twiddly, narrow path. That essentially is your software asset management processes. You've got things like the software request process, joiners, movers, leavers process, reharvesting. You've got all sorts of these SAM processes that are extremely complicated, but can be made simplified if you do communicate how they work with your end users. If you do not communicate this, you'll find that your end users actually go off the path and they'll find another way to source software. Now this may include purchasing on their credit card and then claiming it back as an expense, which again ends up being a breach of compliance because they are actually the licensee, not the organization. It's also important to communicate about your SAM successes. We don't hear enough about the awesome success factors that software asset management brings organizations. Do monthly, weekly, bi-weekly newsletters, say this is what we've achieved in the past few weeks or months. Here's the changes we're going to be making in the future to improve your lives, to reduce spend, to reclaim licenses, to really optimize our position. And here are our future plans within the next few months. So if you hear from us, we're going to be looking at our Autodesk estate, for example. So don't be surprised to hear from us and take part in an internal review. So transparency within software asset management is another really important factor and a driver in you reducing your costs. So first of all, we have the data center. Now, Lewis, would you say the data center is the most expensive environment that an organization has in terms of software spend?
Absolutely. It's also one of the biggest places that is licensed incorrectly.
And that's no small part down to the complex licensing metrics of the like of SAP and IBM and Oracle, right? That's really hard to keep up to date, isn't it?
Even Windows Server, with the way they're changing their licensing metrics as well, as another key factor.
So you need transparency, exactly that. You need transparency to make positive changes like the shift from Windows Server 2012 to 2016. So it's going from a processor model to a core model. Now, it's really easy to overspend in a situation like that because you don't understand how many cores you actually need or what the processor to core relationship is in terms of licensing fees. However, by having that SAM data and that transparency, you can easily understand the processor to core calculation, so you know exactly how many licenses you need to adopt new technologies. It also helps you with your SAP or IBM and your Oracle estates. Now, these vendors are notorious for being extremely complicated and really hard to manage. But by having modules like our Snow Optimizer for SAP or our IBM module or our Oracle management option, you can clearly have and see all of that key data that helps you optimize your licenses, make sure users have the right license types, and really maximize your investment in those key vendors. In fact, 80% of your software spend usually goes in towards your top 5 vendors, and at least 4 of those vendors will be data center software. It's also important to understand the relationships between your host and virtual machines, what impacts that has on licensing, what impact that has on your IT infrastructure. So we're seeing things like Amazon Azure. So this is a brand new cloud technology that everybody wants to make the most of, which is fantastic, and so they should. However, there are a number of risks with that. If you were to spin up a virtual machine in Azure, for example, it's on a pay-as-you-go model. So you could spin up a VM, use it for a couple of days, forget all about it and not use it. The organization will be paying for that on an hourly, daily, weekly, monthly basis. And it's only when the software asset management team looks at the bill for Azure that you realize that you're not optimizing your Azure contract and you're not optimizing your cloud services. Now this is something we firmly believe is going to become even more important next year as more people move to the likes of Azure and AWS. And it's definitely something that the software asset management team needs to take a hold of, have the right people, process and technology in place to make sure you optimize your investment in such a technology. It's also about mobile transparency. Okay, so mobiles are now a huge part of any organization's working life. I mean, Samsung have just released a 256 gig chip for their mobile devices, which is pretty much how much hard disk space an old laptop would have had a few years ago. It's crazy. You are carrying around such a key piece of equipment, but that also leaves you exposed. So you need visibility on application management. You need to know what apps are installed, how they're being used. Data management. What access to different data sets does that device have? Does it have access to our local SharePoint site? Does it have access to CRM data? Does it have access to email clients and stuff like that? So what happens to that data when it gets lost or the device is stolen? Can you support that? Can you make sure that device is locked down or wiped remotely? It's also about data usage, and I mean that from a 3G, 4G perspective, roaming data rights. I used to work for an organisation many moons ago where we had a mobile phone contract in place, and we were spending an awful lot of money on data charges. This is because we didn't have a solution in place to see how much data our sales guys were using, and they'd be travelling all around the world, landing at a new airport and downloading their emails. Now when you're downloading megabytes or gigabytes worth of data in a foreign country, the data charges go through the roof and you end up spending far more money than you need to. And it's also about application usage. So like the desktop and data center environment, only applications that are actually have a business justification and will be used should be installed in your mobile environments. Lewis, I guess we go back to you here on this one and say, the mobile device management piece is becoming far more important now in organizations. What kind of adoption levels are we seeing? Are people taking advantage of their Office 365 licenses? Do they want the technology to be able to manage their mobile estate?
If anything, I would say that mobile device management is actually higher up on the radar than SAM in many ways. There isn't a Gartner Magic Quadrant for software asset management. There is for mobile device management, which we're actually on. But as people are moving more and more towards mobile, as David said, with the Samsung database being so large, people need to be able to track those, and they need to be able to lock down those mobile devices. Can they limit the applications that are being used? From a software asset management perspective, within mobiles, most applications can be downloaded free of charge from iTunes with what seems to be zero contract or hassle involved. But using one of the key software vendors, Adobe as an example, if you download what seems to be a free application, let's say you've got 2 or 3 of them, you actually require an enterprise subscription license, which is $50 a month for a minimum term of 3 years. That can add significant cost to a business just by having a PDF reader, Acrobat, and another Adobe application. And that is a huge risk to a business with what seems to be a free application.
So absolutely. So you could argue then that the education communication piece that we were talking about earlier, if that was in place, then organizations would know that that free Adobe piece of software actually isn't free for corporate use and you need an enterprise license. So it is it's that whole circle of life thing, isn't it, with SAM and mobile devices now, that mobiles can actually be not only a huge enabler but also a big risk, as you just identified.
Absolutely, and nobody ever reads the user agreement when you click I accept terms and conditions, so it's all written in there quite clear, but without that knowledge, and this is where Snow comes into play, we have that knowledge, we'll tell you what license is needed. You'll just get accepted and could be liable.
Good job we read the ULIS then, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So you also transparency on the desktop environment, obviously. The desktop environment, it still seems to be the go-to environment for people when they first implement software asset management. People assume that they're going to get quicker wins, which in some cases you could agree that you can reduce costs a lot quicker than data center, but you also have to do more work and have higher quantities. So first of all, before you start cutting costs, you need to make sure that you understand all of the installed applications across your what versions and additions you've got out there. Are you licensed for that version? Are you licensed for that addition, or have you gone through a downgrade upgrade process? Usage. Now, application usage on the desktop environment is absolutely key when it comes to things like Microsoft renewals or Adobe renewals, Autodesk, etc. Why renew or purchase licenses for applications that you don't actually use? And vice versa, you can look at that and say, how many of our installations of Visio, for example, could actually just do with a Visio viewer? Or how many of our Visio professional licenses we could actually migrate to standard licenses at the next true up, because hey, we don't actually need the additional features of professional. Our users can focus on using standard and still have the same results. That all comes down to a level of governance and control. It's understanding what your users are using it, why, and what their actual requirements are, that you can advise them best on the right application type so that you can then purchase the right license type and ultimately save a lot of money. And the other area of transparency you want is, again, on the users. We mentioned the software usage before, but now with cloud services and the likes of Creative Cloud and Office 365, it is a user license. So instead of looking at the device for usage, you need to look at the user for usage. Now within Snow License Manager, you can actually click on a user's profile, see all of the software that they've been using. Now this is a fantastic way for you to make sure that you optimize things like Office 365 and Creative Cloud, and Autodesk are now just moving towards a subscription type model. It also helps you control the cloud access. So things like Azure and AWS, again, they're user focused. Does your user really need access to that Azure service that's going to cost you $100 a month? Do they really need to spin up a couple of VMwares in Azure that again is going to cost you possibly thousands a month? Do you have that visibility on why they're doing it and how many virtual machines and cloud services and access that users have? This is where it's a new challenge for software asset management. So we keep seeing things like cloud is going to be the death of SAM. You don't need software asset management anymore because, hey, cloud software manages themselves. It can't be non-compliant. It absolutely can be non-compliant, and you still need software asset management to manage that investment. It's also important to manage your associated hardware devices. So again, within Snow, you can use the users section, see all of the different hardware devices that they've logged into. This is really good for looking for people that maybe hoard devices or take someone else's machine and have multiple devices with multiple licenses on. Why do they have all those machines? Do they really need to have 6 laptops hidden in a drawer, all with Office installed? Probably not. They've probably just taken a user's machine that's left and thought, hey, I might need that in the future. But with Snow, you have that visibility on how many devices someone has, so you can optimize not only your software assets, but also your hardware assets as well. Unauthorized software is a massive challenge within organizations as well. So things like poker, games, malware, spyware, etc. And it's important that you start flagging that up and being proactive in making sure that only approved and standardized software is installed with your estate. Now, within Snow License Manager, we have things such as blacklisting and whitelisting to make this really easy and visible for people to use. Lewis, are we seeing our customers or people in general being proactive in making sure they do blacklist an application that shouldn't be within their estate?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've actually had customers where the deciding factor between us and other companies was the fact that we could blacklist and whitelist applications. They were really concerned about corporate governance. Typically with file sharing documents, their information didn't want to be leaked, as to be expected. They found they were using non-commercial versions of Dropbox, BitTorrent, and other applications like that, which they managed to find and identify through using Snow License Manager.
Right, so not only there in that example is it a compliance risk, but it's also a cost risk. So if you said there about people having a non-corporate version of Dropbox, if Dropbox were to look at that organization, they weren't proactively managing it, then they could fine them, couldn't they, for having the non-corporate version?
They'd be charged for a full enterprise license, yeah.
Which is extremely expensive.
Very much so.
So it's also about license optimization. This is probably where you'll see the majority of your cost savings occur. Now, we mentioned earlier what our mission statement is and what license optimization means to us. And it is exactly that. It's optimizing your existing investment. So let me put it another way. You wouldn't hire a new team of staff to perform a certain role and expect to pay them and have them sit around doing nothing. You would expect them to work the hours that you have paid them for. You wouldn't then go and look to hire another member of staff to do additional services if you already had the resources available. It just simply wouldn't happen. So why would you do the same thing for software? So it's all about making sure that you do not overspend on the software assets that you have within your organization. It's also about managing your investment, making those savings, being proactive in your software asset management to ensure that you do build up license pools, you do monitor usage on a proactive basis, and you are reclaiming those licenses. I like to think of software as on a piece of elastic. So you put it out to the user and that elastic stretches. But then when they're not using it, that elastic pings back to the SAM team or the IT team, and it's put into a license pool or redistributed to another user who has a valid business justification. Organizations are still continuing to overspend on software because they do not have the SAM processes or the technologies in place to actually make informed decisions on their software spending. So not only through license optimization will you be able to save money, but you'll also be able to maintain your license compliance. If you are proactively reclaiming that license and you're proactively challenging users as to why they need software, then you'll see your software budget decrease and your optimization increase. So let me give you a good example there on how it maintains compliance. We have a solution called Automation Platform, and Automation Platform can basically automate a number of key SAM processes, including the software reclaim one. So you set up Snow License to say, hey, okay, we're going to say that if there's been no usage for 30 days, we're going to automatically reclaim that license. So therefore, AP will do that for you. You can focus your attention on other things, but you're always constantly maintaining that optimal position, and you're constantly making sure that that investment in your software assets is being utilized and optimized by your users. You don't have any waste out there. Now, by reclaiming licenses and optimizing existing assets, you may actually find that you do generate the license pools. Now, license pools are licenses that have been reclaimed but don't have a new home yet. However, if there was a new project that occurred that needed the software, you can instantly deliver them with a valid licensable application so that they can crack on with the project. Now, this obviously reduces the delivery time for software requests, which improves the relationship with the service desk and also gives the whole IT and software asset management function a much more positive light as being a business enabler rather than a blocker. Software should always be an enabler. It shouldn't be something that stops a user from doing their jobs. So how do you actually do that? So we've mentioned about looking at software usage and reharvesting and generating those licensing pools, but there's also an element of contract negotiation in there. So once you've got that visibility on your existing licenses and your install base, you can start to see what your compliance position is, where your requirements are, and what your risks are. Having that data puts you in a much better position to negotiate a contract with a software vendor. If you go into a meeting with a vendor with absolutely no data, no information, and no understanding on how your users are using the software, then quite frankly you don't really have a leg to stand on in order to negotiate. If you go to that meeting with the valid, accurate data on how many installations you have, how much usage you have, you can dictate that meeting and say how many licenses you need and negotiate a better price. You can also then use that data to forecast potential increases in investment. So you may know that you've got 100 new members of staff coming in, therefore you need 100 extra licenses. It may be cheaper to negotiate at that time that additional 100 licenses, put them in a license pool till the new staff members or project kicks off, but you've already optimized your investment in that software because you've included it as part of your overall contract negotiations. And finally, we talked about the SAM processes, and Lewis and I agreed that they are the cornerstone of optimizing your assets and making those cost savings. But by making sure users do follow the right paths, you can actually ensure that you do reduce the spend on software. So if users are being challenged as to why they need an application, what they need it for, how it will be used, and actually putting a financial value next to their request, you'll actually start to see people say, oh, okay, do you know what? I don't actually really need that piece of software if it's going to cost me X amount of money. Or do you know what, actually, I'm going to give you my licenses back and our budget will increase because we've given you that license back. You can reharvest it, but we want the money for that to invest in cloud services or mobile devices or whatever new technologies you want to use. I've also seen organizations use SAM processes, especially with the reharvesting, as kind of like a personal incentive. So how much money can each cost center save in a year? And then the organization has worked out how much each cost center has saved, and then the winning cost center got extra money for a Christmas party or something personable that made them motivated to do SAM. So Lewis, I guess this is a really good question for you as well in terms of license optimization. Organizations without a SAM solution, license optimization is pretty much impossible, isn't it?
Pretty much. It's a bit like asking somebody, are they using that piece of software that they installed 3 years ago? Yeah, they might use it occasionally. You know, they really like having Photoshop installed on their computer, but actually they're the administrator. They have no need to use Photoshop, maybe editing their selfies from the weekend. It takes away that yes or no question as to how they're using the software. It allows you to actually look, make a decision for yourself. Does that person need the software? How are they actually using it? And to go back to David's point earlier, with things like Visio Project or Adobe Acrobat, it will show you, are they using that particular application sufficiently? Do they just need a reader? If we can actually track that that piece of software has been used 20 times for an average of 45 seconds, they're probably only using it on a reader basis. But without a tool like Snow, it's virtually impossible to tell that without somebody manually recording each time they use a piece of software.
That's a really good point, and actually, I was just about to ask you a question that came in about usage and viewers and stuff like that. So someone has actually asked us, what kind of usage level should we see before we do start to assess whether that person actually needs the software? So now you've kind of answered that, haven't you, by saying within Snow you can look at the average use time and then identify whether for Visio projects or even Adobe's, if they're using it really sparingly, then actually they probably don't actually need a full license, they just need the viewer.
Absolutely. So we will notify you in two different ways of how a piece of software is used. If it's never been turned on in Snow's lifetime, we'll notify you of a completely unused software. But you can also drill down into each individual application or person and see how many times that software has been used, what's the average runtime, when it was first used and when it was last used. So again, if you are using something like Visio or Project, they may well have used it for a sufficient amount of time over a 2 to 3 month period, but they haven't used it in the last 6 months. We'll be able to show you that yes, they did use it sufficiently, but now it's not being used at all. And that's one of the big things that will help you work out whether or not you need to keep that piece of software.
Yes, great question. Thank you. We'll answer all other questions at the end. So now we're coming to our 4th generation SAM concept. Now, even when I first started in software asset management, it was kind of a one-man job, if you like. It was one person's responsibility. Now, I always picture a SAM manager of the past sat in a dark and dreary basement matching one license to one install. Now, that is no longer the same anymore. It's now everyone's responsibility. So we've kind of evolved this 4th generation SAM concept to be an all-encompassing part of every single user's activity. When you think about it, everyone is a customer of software asset management. If they have SAM installed, if they have software installed rather, they are a customer of SAM. They have a responsibility to make sure that the investment the organization has made in them is being optimized and is justified. So software asset management is no longer the responsibility of just one person or a team. We firmly believe that it's the responsibility of every single user within the organization, as they play a key role in making sure that the organization remains compliant, saves money, and optimizes those SAM processes to make software asset management at the heart of the business. So Lewis, if I can hand over to you now, and can you just explain a bit as how Snow software actually adds value?
Absolutely. So as you can see on the slide here, there's various aspects of Snow, starting from the initial point of discovering assets. You can't justify spending anything on software until you understand exactly what you have installed or have access to. From a cloud perspective, what a customer's using, yes, you don't have to worry about compliance so much, but it's how that piece of software is being used. Giving Adobe as an example, do we need to have the full Creative Suite when we could just be using certain applications as part of that suite? We'll show you individual usage of applications as part of a bundle. The second point is the complex licensing agreements, such in the data center. Do we in fact need to have a data center license? We could just have a single server license. If you only have 1 or 2 VMs as opposed to having 30 or 40, you might want to license that particular data center differently. Understanding current and future trends, so we can actually track back and see how that software is being used, even see a trend on how that compliance has been, or even on how the software is installed. It's always the way. You get the latest version of let's say Office comes out, Microsoft will ping you a notification. Do you want to upgrade to 2016 Pro Plus? You don't have to have a license for that. They'll let you do that independently. You click yes, fantastic. You end up having loads of different versions of Office installed throughout your estate. And that's very, very common. We see people with having 2007, 2010, 2013 and 16 of Office all installed on their machine. We'll show you when it was installed, what the trend is, and then you can make a decision based on that. From a financial perspective, ultimately, we all work in IT. We're really excited about using the software. We can see the value, but how do you show your finance director, how do you show the board, the people that are going to sign off this software, where the value is to the business? Now, there's several different ways we can do that. One, from a financial perspective, we have around 100 reports within Snow License Manager. Out of the box, you can configure 10,000 if you wanted to, but out of the box we have financial reports. This is where software can be saved. It will help you with budgeting. If you do cross-charging within a business, so if you have a budget for IT, a budget for marketing, a budget for finance, you can split the costs of IT across those departments by seeing which part of the business is using which software. And that can be automated again, so you can generate a report on a weekly basis, monthly basis, annual basis, completely automatically, and send that to your financial director. In terms of return on investment, we typically would go through a proof of concept process with Snow License Manager. We would highlight where money can be saved using your own data, and that would be pushed towards the financial department of a business or whoever needs to sign it off. Everything as far as deployment, financial management, usage, and visibility of software is covered within Snow.
So you mentioned there about all the different reports and stuff that we can generate. I mean, we've got a number of applications, haven't we, that can help with all different kind of environments and vendors and challenges, if you like. We can help users essentially through their SAM journey, can't we?
We can indeed, and to not cause any confusion, we do cover every single software vendor in the world. The Oracle management option and the SAP optimizer are a separate piece, mainly because SAP is written in ABAP. Therefore, we write our software in the same language, in the legacy language of ABAP, and Oracle is less common. But IBM through to AutoCAD to Microsoft to Adobe is all covered in Snow License Manager. It can all be picked up by the Snow Inventory Agent. That will bring back the usage data. We have a team in Sweden called the Software Recognition Service. Their sole job is research software, find out the licensing metrics. It is the most boring job in the world, but they have to do it, and it's a huge benefit to our business. We currently recognize around 500,000 applications across the world, with a very quick turnaround if a piece of software isn't recognized. So that's another point. Again, visibility is great in terms of what's installed, but we'll show you the correct version, the correct edition, and the licensing metric for that particular application, even as far as cloud-based. So if you have an application that is, let's say, Office 365, you have a hybrid model where it's a cloud application locally installed, we'll be able to indicate whether it's a locally installed standard application or whether it's a locally installed cloud-based application, which of course is a different licensing metric as well.
Absolutely. So if people want to know more about our Snow products, I think we both would encourage you to book a test drive, and like Lewis said, we can actually show you how Snow would work based on your data, which I think is a massive benefit to you, so you can really understand and use your own real life data to see how we can add real life benefits.
Absolutely.
Actually, Lewis, a really good question here that's come in that I think is probably for you. This one is, how do I convince my senior management that I actually need a software asset management technology in order to optimize my software licenses?
Well, that's a good question. The key points really is understanding where the faults are within a business, whether it's process, whether it's visibility. Some companies will have an element of inventory, whether it's from Microsoft SCCM is a great example. It does bring back some data in terms of what's installed. It won't cover the data center, it won't cover your cloud estate, and it will have very basic usage metering. That could be one element that your business is keen on. Compliance is another very useful point of any business. You want to make sure that your company isn't caught out by a vendor through an audit process. But the biggest thing really is return on investment. We can actually prove to any company that the return on investment within Snow is very, very quick. Typically speaking, the cost savings found in a proof of concept, which is usually done across 10% of your estate, shows savings in of a higher value than the tool's cost, which on average is £165 per machine. So it's a pretty easy thing to actually convince your finance director or senior management on once you've got those facts from Snow, especially if you go through the proof of concept process.
Excellent, thank you, Lewis. Another one, this is an interesting one, and this is one that I have done in the past actually, is should I actually track the cost avoidances or hard cash savings that I make through software asset management? Yes, is the honest answer to that. So when I was a software asset management manager in the past, I would track all of the cost avoidances made through software reharvesting or just removing software, even changing versions and additions. So if I had, like Lewis mentioned there, the brilliant Adobe Acrobat example, so if someone actually had an Acrobat Pro installed but they only needed a reader, I would track the cost differences between the two and make sure that I could prove the value of software asset management not only to the team internally, but also to the senior management and the end users. It would then be generating a report to say how much money we've avoided through SAM in the past month or 12 months or whatever. And that was a really key piece of information that we could provide the business, if you like. So, Lewis, we talk all about software asset management and processes and stuff like that and cost avoidance, but how are we actually doing things automatically? How can we reduce a lot of the manual effort, if you like, that a SAM person endures on a daily basis?
Sure. Well, with the thanks from the software recognition team, the licensing reconciliation process is completely automated. So from a compliance perspective, typically if you're ever having a Microsoft audit or Microsoft review, which is actually the most common form of a Microsoft audit, they will say to you, right, please can you prove what's installed, please can you also prove what you have purchased from a licensing perspective. That can take even the smallest of companies weeks or even months. We completely automate that for you. If you're using something like SCCM or perhaps using your inventory from a service desk tool such as Landesk or Delcase, it will still come back with a very basic version or name of that particular software application. So using SQL Server as an example is incredibly hard to license. It may come back as SQL Server version 9. There is no such thing as SQL Server version 9. What it in fact could be is SQL Server 2012 Enterprise. But only our software recognition team will be able to tell you that. We'll automate the process, we'll establish the core factors, the minimum requirements with SQL, for example, and that will show your exact compliance position. That's one of the biggest keys in automating. But again, we talked about the reporting side of Snow. That is configured out of the box. So your usage reporting, whether your particular machine hasn't been inventoried, if there's an application that's been blacklisted, which has been highlighted, all of this is automatic. You'll be notified of any changes within your estate, whether somebody springs up a VM or whether they download Solitaire, that will notify you automatically. There is virtually nothing manual aside from making the decisions based on the data within Snow.
Lewis, another question for you. Sorry, but they're coming in. You mentioned reports there. Previous experience with SAM Technologies proves that generating a report can be a complex and timely process. How does Snow License Manager help me develop and then execute a report?
So, most of the reports are actually configured by us before you implement Snow. So your compliance report, your cost savings report, even if it's by organizational unit, so if you want to generate a report based on total IT spend, let alone cost savings. It could be every piece of every computer, every laptop, every VM, and all the applications installed on that machine. From a cost perspective, divvied out into marketing, IT, and finance. We could do that without any configuration whatsoever.
They're out of the box, aren't they?
Completely out of the box.
We've got about 70 odd out of the box reports, and just to further emphasize Lewis's point there, actually creating custom reports within Snow as well is really, really easy to do. If you are having challenges in creating a custom report, then all you have to do is get in contact with us or your service provider, and we can easily help you create the ideal report that you want, and then we can save the report, and you can also schedule it so that it comes out into like an Excel format, for example, on a monthly basis. Cool. So I think that's probably the lot from Lewis and myself. So thank you very much for your time today. We hope you found it useful. As you can see, there are a number of ways in which you can save money through software asset management. So I will now hand back to Grey Matter to conclude the webinar.
Thank you. So yeah, as I said, thank you for attending and watching our webinar. We hope you found it useful. If you do have any further questions that you can't think of right now, please give us a call on 01364 654 100. And we will send them over to David and Lewis to get them answered. If you want to set up a demo or have a deeper discussion, we can set that up for you. Plus our guys are really knowledgeable around the Snow software piece themselves. So speak to one of our account managers and they'll help you out, particularly if you want to look into purchasing Snow software. You can also visit our website at www.greymatter.com. If there's any other last questions, please drop them down now. Other than that, thank you for attending again. We'll be sending the recording out to everyone that's attended. So thank you again and have a good day.